The bank account never lies. If you want to understand how to think about attribution for your advertising, for your D2C brand, and for your omni-channel brand, that is the guiding principle above every other guiding principle. There are all of these tools out there for how to measure your ads. But what I want to talk about right now is just the reality that you can get really far with zero additional attribution or incrementality tools by simply watching your bank account. So let's get into it. Okay, I want to think about two stages right now of meta ads, of all advertising performance, of how e-commerce businesses operate in general, okay? And the first of those is like the sort of sub 10 million stage of revenue for most brands. It might be a little higher than that, but for a lot of D2C e-commerce brands, if you're sort of sub 10 million, probably even sub 20 million, the vast majority of your spend is very likely going to be on Facebook ads, on meta ads, if you're running ads, if you're like most brands. Now, there's all kinds of brands doing all kinds of other stuff in amazing ways, and that's great. But for many brands, that is the vast majority of their spend. And so the question then for them is how to measure the impact of their meta ads on their revenue. And you can get extremely far by doing two things, okay? Number one, if you measure your ad performance based on a click, you will get really far. However, your meta ads are set up right now in terms of the optimization, 1 day click, 1 day view, 7 day click, 1 day view. That's the default for any campaign that you launch on meta ads. If you check your attribution and you're on any measurement, that's fine. But go and pull up in your meta ads account. If you go to your column setup, you can see a compare attribution windows menu item, okay? And when you go to that, you can click on that and pull up 28-day click attribution in your ad account. And the reason that I think that's really useful, okay, is because it basically ladders your data to a click and allows you to see on a click basis, on the longest window that meta ads will give you without using any other tools, the total performance of your meta ads. And what I have found repeatedly is that most brands can basically measure the impact of their ads by looking at that number. That is, if you are seeing a 28-day click revenue of $10,000 from a campaign or from your total ad account or whatever, okay, it probably produced about $10,000 in revenue for your business. And especially what you ought to look at is your new customer revenue. Now, not all of your meta ad spend is going to support new customer revenue. It will also support some returning customer revenue, even if you run exclusions. It's just the reality of how modern tracking works. But the majority of it should be, as long as you're excluding past customers from your ad spend, the majority of it should be towards new customers. And so what you could do to measure the performance of your meta ads above absolutely everything else is simply measure on 28-day click and then go check your actual new customer revenue, okay? And this is where we get to like the bank account, right? Really, it's the Shopify account in this case, but at some point it's the bank account. The Shopify account basically will not lie to you about how much revenue you got. There's some things with your revenue definition, there's a couple of details, but essentially the dollars that your Shopify account is reporting to you are the dollars that came in from customers in your business. And if your ads are producing value, it will show up there. And so the fundamental idea that's so important for you to keep straight is tune out the noise of all the tools that, Triple Whale, Northbeam, incrementality tools, all these things. If you're sub 10 or $20 million, if 80% plus, 75% plus of your ad spend is on meta ads, revenue is the attribution tool. It is the attribution tool, and particularly new customer revenue is the attribution tool. If you put your focus there, you will see very clearly whether or not your ads are producing value. And if you then go look in your actual ad account and see the 28-day click revenue of different campaigns, it will basically tell you how each of those campaigns is performing, okay? Now, this is modeled data. It's not perfect, and that's fine. But I'll tell you this. In my experience, meta ads is very unlikely to be over-reporting your revenue on a 28-day click basis. What it is more likely to be doing is slightly under-reporting your revenue. And this is surprising to a lot of people because what they think is that, these big tech companies, they're just trying to do the thing that they want to do to try and get the most money from you as possible. And so they're hiding this data. I just don't think that's true. I think meta ads is trying to measure on a click basis the performance of your ads properly. And therefore, they are modeling that as best as they can, because if your money from your ads ends up in your bank account, you will keep spending with them. That is the ultimate measure that everybody cares about, is the business health. That's what will ultimately lead to more spend for Meta. So they actually have an incentive, I think, to get this right. Okay. And then, of course, we can recognize that there are some untracked purchases for all kinds of reasons. Some people are going to be view converters. It's a small percentage, but they're going to view your ad, think about it, and look at it a little bit, and then they're not going to purchase until later. it is it is it is very likely the case that your meta ads 20-day click attribution is slightly underreporting the total value of your spend. There's another pulse check I like to use when I'm looking at an ad account to see, like, is everything basically right? And that is to keep track week over week for a very long time, and month over month even for a very long time, of the last click revenue of my ads. So what I mean is using Google Analytics or a Shopify UTM traffic report. They're both really easy to set up, okay? Particularly Shopify now that Google GA4 is a mess. The Shopify, being able to use your UTM tags, UTM parameters, set up dynamically in your ad account, and measure the last click performance of your ads is a nice pulse check in the midst of this. So it's not perfect. Last click revenue, right, which is like a revenue that came, somebody clicked on your ad and bought without leaving the site. Just boom, click buy, just like that. Okay, there's a really tight feedback loop. It doesn't, cookie tracking is not an issue here. The UTMs work either way, and so you can tell basically with an objective measure over a long period of time if you're basically in the right range of performance or not. And so, if you average a 1-to-1 last day click ROAS, okay, so you spend $10,000 and you get $10,000 back on a last click basis measured on that very, very tight window, okay, then you can see that if that's what I've been getting, something like a 1-to-1 or within 10 or 20% of that for a bunch of weeks in a row, and then suddenly I get a 1.5-to-1, then probably my ad performance is doing really, really well. Or if I'm getting a 0.5-to-1, it's probably doing a lot worse than you think. In all of that, though, the real key is measure it against the actual money in your Shopify account. If your Shopify money is going up, if the money in your Shopify account is going up, if the money in your bank account is going up, the ads are working. And that is actually the crucial principle that takes you to part 2 of this. Because at some point you get beyond meta ads, all right? And when you go beyond meta ads, now you're introducing other channels and other distribution channels, not just ad channels, okay? And I've been looking at this. I had a client recently over a couple week period or a month over month period, had their meta ads performance almost exactly the same, okay? On a spend basis and on a revenue basis, reported on 20-day click revenue in meta ads. Okay, so the basic performance was exactly the same, which was great. Okay, but they had spent about 40 grand more in Google ads, and it was like a 25 grand versus 65 grand. So it was like 150% more, or whatever that amounts to. Month over month, it was a lot difference. Actually, the more recent month was the smaller month. Okay, particularly because we had pulled back our Performance Max spend. I have become really suspicious of Performance Max, even though we're excluding brand terms. It looked to me like PMax campaigns were potentially hurting the total performance. And we thought, let's see what happens if we push our target on PMax, and we'll say, let's just make up some numbers, from a 3-to-1 to a 4-to-1. All right, if that was the performance difference. Well, if that was the case, so what we did was we forced PMax to spend less and be more efficient, okay, on the assumption that PMax, unlike meta ads, is over-reporting its total contribution. Essentially, that a 3-to-1 is really actually producing something like a 1.5-to-1 or something like that, which was basically the assumption we had, and we wanted to be above that target. So we said, okay, let's go from 3-to-1 to 4-to-1. Well, that was basically the chunk of spend that came out of my total spend. And what I noticed was we lost a whole bunch of revenue month over month. Okay. And the meta ads performance is the same. The Google ads performance is different. Forget for a second the click-based numbers in Google ads, forget anything else. It looks to me like very likely to be the case that in fact that PMax spend was more incremental than I thought. And therefore we ought to turn it back up, and we ought to see if we can generate more revenue based off of that, and see if we can reverse that, not because of the Google ads number in platform, but because we're looking at the bank account and we're tracking, again, specifically new customer revenue every single week, watching to see week over week, month over month, how our ads are producing revenue. I talked to a manufacturer the other day who saved 30% on his COGS, got $1 off the fulfillment cost of every order that went out, and cut his lead time down in half for his product from his manufacturer. And he did that by working with Move Supply Chain. He heard about Move through my podcast, one of my ads talking about them. And probably I made the same pitch in that ad that I'm going to make right now, which is this: your supply chain is under optimized. There are savings like that in your business. And imagine how much better your business would be if your COGS and your 3PL costs were that much lower, and if cash moved through your business that much more efficiently, which is what happens when your lead time gets cut down, your forecasting risk massively decreases. And what is so true for so many brands that have been around in the e-commerce space is that their supply chains just haven't had the kind of optimization that they should, because they've optimized all kinds of other parts of their businesses. I'm actually convinced that in the next year or two, this is going to be the place that more and more operators are spending their time, is working on supply chains, because right now they are so bad. I actually talked with Laura Guevara, the CEO of Move, who you've heard on this podcast a few times before, and she said she loves when she gets on calls with e-commerce operators, because pretty much within 5 minutes of talking to them about their supply chain, she's like, oh yeah, we can win really big for this brand. Like over and over and over again, they're so under optimized that they can make really big moves really, really fast that help their business. Move is based in the supply chain. It's an agency style service. So it's not like hiring somebody in your business as a full-time supply chain person. You're going to go with them and work on a project basis and say, how do we tighten up our supply chain? How do we get faster lead times? How do we save money in different places? How do we maintain really high product quality at the same time as we do this? How do we have backup manufacturers and think about inventory planning? All those things. So it is really, really worth it. Go check out movesupplychain.com. If you are working on an e-commerce business and you have not tried to optimize your supply chain yet, go to Move, movesupplychain.com. I am building a supply chain for my own brand with Move. It's been an incredible experience so far. It's been really affordable, just really great. I just can't say enough good things about them. Movesupplychain.com. Go check it out. If you start to expand that mentality out across your total business over a very long period of time, what you will find is that it becomes an incredibly good guide. Because if you are making enough profit in your business while spending on ads to grow your business, if you're doing those two things at the same time and your business is basically healthy in those ways, it's really hard to go very wrong from a measurement perspective. Now, I do think brands, as they get bigger and as they get more complex, can use some tools to help them grow. I am not a big fan of MTAs or MMMs. I don't think those are very useful tools in the same way. What I'm much more interested in is incrementality testing, but incrementality testing at this point is very expensive. The best tool I know of in this space that I've seen is House. It's probably a 6-figure line item per year. It's really slick stuff, but and I believe it's really useful. But it's just most brands cannot afford to drop $100,000 on 10 or 12 incrementality tests for the year. Okay, so for that reason, you have to find a way to try to solve this problem for a lot of brands without doing that. Once you get to 30, 40, 50 million, maybe you're starting to do that. But for a long time, it's not the case. Plus, House, maybe the incrementality tools can do something with like literally physical retail sell through, but physical retail sell through is basically going to be impossible to measure. Even Amazon halo effect is really hard, because this is another thing that really dogs brands as they get bigger. And I've had this conversation with a lot of clients where it's like, okay, we have Amazon, we have a retail presence. Now our D2C performance looks worse than it used to. Is that because we actually are doing worse on our Facebook ads, or is it just because we're achieving our revenue in other channels? And I want to tell you a story about this to help illustrate the challenge of this a little bit more and how real the halo effect is, okay? Because what I'm telling you right now, for sure, 100% with certainty, is that there is a halo effect from your D2C ad spend on your other channels. And you have to take that seriously. Otherwise, you're just being foolish with your ad spend, okay? There is a halo effect. I saw an incredible example of this with one client of mine who at one point launched a major mass retailer in the US, like thousands of doors, okay? And when they launched that retailer, they put it all over their website, and they had a thing that's like now available, on their homepage, now available at this retailer. And when they did that, our ad performance, as soon as they started saying we were available in these other channels, our ad performance immediately tanked, immediately on a ROAS basis. Suddenly, everything looked a lot worse. And then what we did was we steadily rolled back all of those things on the website. So we stopped saying that we were in those retail settings. And instead, we just we're going to let people find that out when they got to those retail settings, okay? And our performance came back up. Now, it never came back up all the way. But what that tells me is that for some large subset of customers, they're very, very happy to be buying products in a mass retail setting if they can get them there because they regularly shop in those places or they like them. And I believe the exact same thing is true of Amazon as the brick and mortar example that I just gave you. And I believe that in part because you can watch branded search over time on Amazon as you spend more. And so what does that tell you? It tells you that your D2C spend is producing value in these other channels. The problem is it's extremely hard to measure exactly how much. And so here's what I have done to begin to answer this question, and that I think is the actual right way to do it, to do 2 steps, okay? Number 1, okay, the first step in this process is to seek to measure your performance by simply estimating some halo effect. And this is true even if you're just Amazon. Okay, I talked to another brand just the other day that was looking at their Amazon revenue, and their revenue was about 30 some odd percent of their total business. And they had spent some money on Amazon ads for sure. But the money they had spent on Amazon ads, like if you just sort of measured their total revenue on Amazon versus the ad spend, it would versus the Amazon ad spend, it would look like it was drastically more efficient than the way they spent on their D2C brand. Okay, let's call their D2C brand like a 2-to-1. It was actually lower than that. I think it was like a 1.8 or 1.9. Okay, so essentially, like if you just measured their D2C spend based off of their Shopify performance, it looked like they were spending about 60% of their revenue, something like that, on ads, right? So it's really hard for a brand, even with great margins, to be healthy at 60% of your revenue going to ads. That's pretty tough. Now, the other fascinating thing is that the vast, 80+%, maybe 85%, I think it was about 85% of the revenue was new customer revenue. So you could see that their revenue was not just a bunch of returning customers over time. Basically, the majority of their spend was creating the majority of the new customer revenue. Now, they were running it really tight, and it's possible that they should, you might even say, like, how can you survive on that? At that point, you're talking about your new customer CPA being like 70% of your new customer revenue on D2C, except that their Amazon business was, again, an additional 30% or something like that of their revenue. And their Amazon spend was probably, 10% of their Amazon revenue. And so if you do all that math, you realize there's no way their Amazon spend is producing a 10-to-1 return on Amazon, right? What is clearly happening here is that their D2C spend is producing a whole bunch of Amazon revenue for them. And therefore, they rightly were measuring the performance of their D2C on an untrackable number. They were not using, now there are incrementality tools. Again, they're expensive, but there are incrementality tools that will do this with Amazon and see, like, okay, what's your actual return on Amazon from your D2C spend just by doing holdout tests and stuff. And that's great. But again, this brand was not going to be able to afford that. Okay, they just weren't at the stage of business where they could do that. So instead, all they could do was measure on the bank account. And you know what? It worked perfectly for them. Their D2C numbers looked bad, and yet their D2C, their Facebook ROAS in platform looked bad. But when you actually measure the performance against their total business, it worked really, really well. Everything was going the right direction. And what that tells you, I think, is that is not an isolated incident. That is happening for every brand everywhere. And there's a really obvious way of thinking about this for a second, okay? And that is, just consider the initial value of your ad spend and then the byproduct value of your ad spend, okay? The initial value of your ad spend, sort of the optimized value of your ad spend for the vast majority of Meta ads advertisers is conversion optimized ad spend, okay? So what you're doing is you're telling Meta, I'm going to give you money, you get me purchases at the lowest cost possible. That's what you're telling Meta, or you give me the highest value of purchases possible, which would be to your ROAS bidding. Okay, it's not just the lowest cost CAC. Now it's the highest value AOV. Okay, so those are the two options: lowest CAC, highest value. Okay, you go and do that, and you report that value on the basis of the purchase that you get. But no matter how much you do that, okay, for the majority of brands, well, let's just take like an average brand. Let's say a brand is converting on a 28-day click basis, which is not a true last click conversion, but on a 28-day click basis, let's say they're converting, let's just call it 5% of their Meta ads clicks are turning into purchases, okay? 5%. That would mean that if you drive 100,000 clicks on your ads, okay, then 95,000 of them do not end up in purchases. And yet, if you measured their time on your website, I bet it is at least I bet it's around a minute on average for a lot of brands. That means people spent 100,000 people or 100,000 clicks, right? That's not quite people, but 100,000 clicks generated 5,000 purchases, but 95,000 1-minute other sessions. And it is foolish to think that there is simply no value to that brand exposure, brand awareness, and brand equity building. The time they spent reading your PDP and maybe clicked over to your about page or read your reviews and just looked over your product and compared the price to something else. The idea that is not producing value in your other channels is just wrong. It's just wrong. Of course it is doing that, but that is the byproduct of your ad spend. And what many people do is they think of their ad spend entirely in terms of the actual conversion value without thinking about the byproduct value for other channels, if they have other channels at all. And they should. they should think about that. You should recognize that those 95,000 clicks, or in the case of a year, maybe 950,000 clicks, depending on how much you're spending, right? Those clicks, maybe a couple million clicks, are producing value. That's before you talk about the video views, the time they spent on your social channels, any of those other engagements with your brand. Of course, that's doing something, and it's building somewhat over time. And therefore, the way to measure the performance of that is to look at the actual revenue under the channels. The best place to learn the specifics of how to set up and run your Meta Ads account, the best course style content of which I am aware on the internet, is through Common Thread Collective's Admission program. Admission is an incredible thing. It is a course style program where you basically get access to a portal with a whole bunch of different courses that are going to give you the specifics updated all the time. So you're staying up with what's new and best in e-commerce. Okay, and things are changing all the time, so you got to do that. Admission will get you course style content around all the kind of things I talk about here all the time, like how to think about measurement, how to think about forecasting, how to think about setting up cost caps, from scratch. Like, what do you do if you need to go build those? Like, there's all of the details of how to run a D2C business, and they're coming straight down from the mind of Taylor Holiday. On top of the course style content, which is already amazing to begin with, there's a weekly webinar Q&A, including a specific gated private Q&A with Taylor Holiday, who in my view is one of the very brightest minds in e-commerce, if not the brightest, just a brilliant guy. You get specific access to him, and you also get ongoing coaching and support from highly experienced media buyers at Common Thread Collective for an incredibly low cost. In fact, they'll give you their first support call for free if you sign up for admission from my link. Look, if you're trying to grow your knowledge of e-commerce, how to run a good, efficient business and a good, efficient ad account, how to do those things really well, I cannot recommend admission highly enough. I am telling you, person after person I've talked to tells me about their Meta Ads account. They DM me something, and I just think you would have saved yourself tens of thousands of dollars if you'd have just joined admission and done what they say. So you can go to the link of that. Check the link in the description for this. I have an affiliate link where you get a free coaching call with their team. You cannot get that through any other sources. Free coaching call through my affiliate link. So go check that out in the show notes for this, or in the description on YouTube. It's going to really help you a lot. Go join admission today. So again, to come back to this example, if you have an Amazon business, or if you have a mass retail business, you should basically assume that those 95,000 clicks are producing some value in those channels. And what I watched happen for the example of the client that I mentioned earlier that had sold in that mass retail business is that their D2C ROAS never fully recovered back to where it was before. And yet the total revenue in their business either grew or is either stayed the same or it grew some. It just, at least a lot of the performance, a lot of the revenue shifted from their D2C channel to their mass retail channel, but it was clearly being powered by the same thing. And they also had Amazon. It was clearly being powered by the same thing. And so the mistake they could make was not deploying enough ad dollars in their business. And that would be the really foolish thing, because they would look at just their Facebook ads dashboard or something like that and go, oh, it's not producing a good return. We gotta make sure that we turn that spend down because we're losing money. No, they weren't losing money. They were just getting it in other channels. And in fact, for them, they were the kind of business where the other channels probably mattered more than their D2C business, because the future of their business was going to be in those channels. It was a better approach for them to have other channels. So now, that doesn't mean you can spend forever. The check on this, ultimately, the way to measure this, I think, is really simple, which is to forecast the performance of your business all the way through your P&L across your channels, have some sense of what you need to see, and deploy your ad dollars much more like a traditional marketing department would. Hey, we expect that we're going to make, I don't know, let's call it $3 million this month. Okay. We expect that. We think we can spend $800,000 on ads. So let's deploy that $800,000 as efficiently as possible. And then you measure what happened. Okay, we spent $800,000. We actually made $2.5 million, which means our ads didn't produce the outcome that we wanted. Oh, we actually made $4 million, which means our ads are working better than we think, no matter what the actual platform tells us at a given time. And so then you start doing that over time, measuring, seeing how your performance goes, and basically just do that. If you do that, sort of think like a more traditional marketer, once you're omnichannel, I think you're going to get really, really far with measurement. And as you grow, then you can start to bring in more complex tools to think about specific channels, et cetera. In all of that, you can still use the dashboard of the tool of the ad distribution channel that you have to measure relative effectiveness of your ads. So what I mean is, right, that doesn't mean that that sort of measure across the total P&L, forecast and behave that way. sort of more like a traditional marketing department would, and less like a D2C sort of spend when you hit a ROAS target kind of mentality. What you can still do is see like, okay, if campaign 1 in my meta ads account is producing a 2-to-1 on click, and campaign 2 is producing a 1-to-1 on click, then I can probably safely assume that the campaign producing a 2-to-1 on 28-day click is better than the campaign producing a 1-to-1. And therefore, I ought to scale the 2-to-1 campaign, because whether it's measured on just the D2C channel or on my other channels, I can do the same. Now, of course, I'm still running manual bids, including for these kinds of brands that are mass retail or that have big Amazon presence. You just have to change your targets on your manual bids based off of your sort of relative target, based off of any halo effect you're assigning to those channels. But the point still stands. What I'm saying is, within the actual ad dashboard, you can use the dashboard as a directional signal of what's going on. Let me wrap this up. In all of this, I talked to a brand a long time ago that was a major mass retail brand, really big company that had sort of exploded. And it makes sense that they're mostly mass retailers selling diapers. I talked to a guy who had been running their D2C ads for a long time. And then as the brand grew, they opened up mass retail after being a D2C specific brand. As the brand grew, he said they pulled back their ad spend a whole bunch because all of a sudden their D2C performance looked worse. And then what they realized pretty quickly over time is that their mass retail sales came down with it. And so they thought, oh no, the D2C spend is actually powering everything. The conversion optimized spend is still the best use of their dollars for a really long time in their business. They didn't go and run a bunch of link clicks ads or anything like that. Now, maybe they did that at some point, but they're still running conversion optimized campaigns, taking the byproduct of those 95,000 clicks, that example that I gave earlier, and assuming that that was producing value in other channels. So they pulled back their spend because they thought, okay, our D2C spend got a lot worse. But then they pushed their spend right back up over time as they realized their retail sell-through was getting bad. And of course, what happened in the end was that their retail sell-through improved at the same time. Now, maybe that's just a coincidence. I think it's not. I think what's very likely to be the case is that they recognized correctly that that spend was actually producing value in other channels, and that if you have a D2C only mentality about that, you're going to short the growth of your business in ways that are not really helpful for anything. At the baseline level, just to recap, measure on click. A click gets you really, really far. It's a really helpful metric. As you get bigger, let the bank account decide, and don't worry too much about measuring perfectly until you can get to a stage where you're big enough to where you can bring in maybe some more complex tools that can help you think through this down to individual channel levels, because those tools do exist and they can be useful, I think, for larger brands. But especially when you're in that middle phase and you're trying to grow, for a lot of brands, I really see them struggle with this problem. And so work on, I'm dealing with 8-figure brands. I talk with my clients about it all the time. That's the way I would think about it. In the end, the bank account never lies. And if you're growing your business at a healthy profit number, a profit number that works for your business, your ads are working.